So a few days ago I put a poll up on my DeviantArt asking people what they'd like to see for a tutorial, and cel shading was a fairly common one. So we're going to go ahead and just jump right into that using some line art and a picture I did a while ago, but it's nice and simple enough that we can use it. And the first thing you want to do is lay down all your color, which you can see I've already done in this folder right here. And it's basically just your flat color. Use as many layers or as few as you want to do. It doesn't matter, but for today we're going to go ahead and shade him. So for that we need another folder over here. And the first thing I like to do is get a nice bright color, usually pink or blue, and a pen, and we have to decide where our light source is. So we're going to say that the light source is right here. And it's probably not going to be a pink light source, but that's where it is. And you just go ahead and I block in everywhere that I want the light to be. So it's going to be some right there, a little bit on his nose. And this doesn't have to be very perfect. It's just kind of telling you where you're going to be putting your light. Where you're going to be putting your highlights. If there's going to be a little bit of highlight there on his cheek that we're not going to do. There's his chin. Okay, all in here is pretty much colored. All over here. And we're going to go ahead and not quite do everything, because the light source is up and above, so he's going to have some light over here where it's not completely obscured by the rest of him. And definitely some shadows in here. And again, it doesn't have to be perfect, just getting it in there so that you know where you're going to be putting your shadows. Put on it there. A lot in here. A little bit on that edge. Some up in here. Some more down there. And once you're happy with that, that's pretty much all we need. And it doesn't look very nice right now, but we're going to fix that. So you go ahead, you drop your level there on a new one. And again, I always like to use a nice bright contrasting color so I can see what I'm doing. And I use the same pen that I use for inking. Only I use a little bit thicker line than I use for the inking, and that's just, we're going to start putting it in right here. Not quite there, I want it a little bit more in the middle. There it is. And you can just go ahead here. And now we're really starting to block in where we want the shadow. And you might want to leave in a little bit of room for highlights, and we're going to go ahead later on and put in the highlights as well. We want some shadow over here that we didn't quite get. And we're going to want some shadow down here where his hair is on his scalp. There's a nice dark spot there. And this is just the way I cel shade. There's many ways to do it, really no right or wrong way, but this is how I do it. And the brush that I use has the stabilizer on it set up to the top there, set up to the highest that it will go. And this is the same brush that I use for inking. There we go. I like that. So we'll go ahead and start doing his face. Okay. Over here. And you can see that we're not completely following what we'd blocked out. It's just there to give us a little bit of an idea of what we want, where we want it. I want to get some shading over here under his eye. On the eye. And the blue doesn't look great, but we're going to change that. Bit of a highlight on his ear. Okay. And now for these big pieces, we can just take the regular paintbrush and paint it in. And cel shading really is just like any other kind of shading. You have to be very mindful of where your light source is, how it's going to be working with what you've put down. You can't just throw some dark on one side and call it good, because there's going to be reflecting light sources and everything else like that. And we're going to get to that a little bit more when we get to the highlights. That's going to take care of a lot of the reflecting for us. He's starting to look like something out of Braveheart. And this is probably all I'm going to do, just so I can show you the basics here without having to speed up the whole thing. There we go. So that doesn't look much like a shadow. And you fix this by setting the entire layer group to multiply, but that's still very blue. So now we're going to preserve the opacity and find kind of a good blue-gray that we like. And I don't like to use something that's completely gray. I like to have some kind of a undertone in there. And we're going to turn off the pink. And there we go. There's a nice hard edge shadow, and we can turn that down a little too if we think that's, or if we want to get a little bit lighter without having to mess with colors. You can change the layer opacity there. So I like about right there. So now we've got the shadow, but it still looks kind of flat, so we're going to add another layer group. And for this, we can just go ahead and use a nice bright yellow. And we're back to the ink pen that we used before. And we need to put a layer on there. And we're just going to very lightly, let's see if I can. There we go. Just very lightly painting along the edge. That's a little too thick still. And any of these black lines that are going into his hair, we're gonna put little thin lines around those too. And this can go over the shadow that we put before. It's not going to make a huge difference if we do. And in some cases, you even want it to. And now we're going to do his face, the same thing, just on any edge that's facing where the light source is. And let's put a little bit in his hair down here just to give it a little bit more texture down here. So there's some. And even though on this side over here isn't in shadow, that's not where the light source is, so we don't want to actually put a highlight there. You'd put over on this edge right here, because up here was where our light source was, so it's all shining over this way. Anything on this side is still in shadow. The only reason we're putting it down here in his hair is to give it a little bit more texture. Sometimes you can break the rules like that if you have this big area like his hair that should have some varying textures. And now I like to set this to a luminosity layer. And that's a very, very bright yellow, so we're gonna knock that down to about a cream color here and color over it. There we go. And we do the same thing we did with the shadow, just try to find a nice, not quite bright yellow, not quite white color, and again, drop this down. That's still too yellow, we can see that now that we've dropped it down. Drop right in there, a little too white. And down there seems too bright, so we're going to unlock that opacity and find the airbrush, which is somewhere in here. And we're going to set the airbrush to erase and just very lightly erase this down here so that it's not quite as bright as what's up there in the actual light. It still gives us that little bit of texture, but it's not going to be really distracting up here in the shadow, and we'll do the same thing up here on his hair. There we go. And now we can turn it up a little bit so we can see it on his face, and give it another pass up here on his hair to lighten that up. Another one down here to lighten that up. But now you can also see the highlighting on his face a little bit more. And it's pretty simple, not very complicated, but that's the way I do my cel shading. And we can even go over here if we really want to and soften up this edge a little bit. There we go. If that's something you want to do. I like the hard edge myself, and we can even probably drop that down a little bit more. But there you go. This is the way I do the cel shading. There are many other methods out there to do it. You may just need to look around and find the right one for you. But let me know if you found this helpful, and if there's anything else you'd like me to cover in the future.